Israel, a country no bigger than a single region, yet beneath its stones hide secrets that have defied explanation for thousands of years. Tombs sealed shut forever, tunnels no one is allowed to enter, manuscripts that rewrote the history of religion, and a place where the Bible says the world will end. Today, 10 of the most haunting and unexplained facts about this land. Some of them, science is still trying to figure out, without success. 10th place on this list goes to the Dead Sea. On the surface, it sounds like a curiosity from a travel brochure. The saltiest lake in the world, you float without trying. Tourists take selfies covered in black mud. But once you peel back the postcard version, what's underneath is something far stranger, and nobody has fully explained it. The Dead Sea sits at the lowest point on the surface of the Earth, nearly 430 meters below sea level. The air pressure here is noticeably higher than anywhere else most people will ever stand. The oxygen is denser. Ultraviolet radiation is reduced because of the extra atmospheric layers above. Researchers have documented that people with certain lung conditions breathe more easily here than anywhere else on the planet. The Dead Sea, despite its name, appears to actively support certain forms of life, just not the ones we'd expect. The water itself smells, not unpleasantly, but powerfully, a thick mineral odor, slightly sulfurous, that clings to skin long after you leave the shore. The surface shimmers in a way that's different from normal water, oilier, heavier, almost reluctant to move. Step in, and the sensation on your skin is immediate. A faint chemical sting, a slickness that doesn't wash off. Your body is pushed upward with a force that feels almost aggressive. But here is where it gets unsettling. The Dead Sea is dying. It's shrinking at a rate of more than 1 meter per year. The shoreline has retreated so dramatically in recent decades that old photographs show water where there is now cracked, salt-encrusted desert. Sinkholes, some of them large enough to swallow a car, have been opening up along the former shoreline with increasing frequency. In 2017, engineers documented over 6,000 sinkholes in a strip of land that had been underwater within living memory. What's causing them is understood mechanically. As the freshwater table drops, it dissolves underground salt deposits, and the ground collapses. But why the water level is falling faster than models predicted, why sinkholes are appearing in clusters with no obvious pattern, why certain sections of the former lakebed are chemically different from what they should be, these questions remain without clean answers. There is also the matter of what's at the bottom. The Dead Sea floor has never been fully mapped. The deepest sections remain unexplored. In 2011, a team of researchers sent underwater equipment into the depths and discovered freshwater springs erupting from the lake floor. Cold, clear water pushing up through the brine. Around those springs, they found microbial mats, living ecosystems in a place named for death, thriving in conditions that should make life impossible. The report was published in a scientific journal, and then, quietly, further investigations stopped. No follow-up expedition has returned. The Dead Sea has been here longer than any civilization in the region. It watched Sodom, if Sodom existed. It was there before the first temple was built. It will likely be there, in some diminished form, long after we're gone. And it still has not told us everything it knows. The strange contradiction at the heart of the Dead Sea is this. A place named for its lifelessness keeps revealing life. A place named for its stillness keeps changing. The springs on the lake floor push fresh water up through brine. The sinkholes open without warning. The shoreline retreats and reveals objects that haven't seen air for centuries. Roman-era coins, fragments of rope, organic material from civilizations that swam here in the same heavy water 2,000 years ago. Each time the lake pulls back a little further, something else surfaces that was never meant to be found. The Dead Sea, as it dies, is becoming more revealing. What it will show us as it continues to shrink is something no one has yet predicted. At number 9, the geoglyphs of the Negev Desert. Most people have heard of the Nazca lines in Peru, giant figures carved into a South American plateau, visible only from the air, their purpose still debated. What most people have not heard is that the Middle East has its own version, and in some ways the ones hidden in the Negev Desert are even harder to explain. They're called desert kites. That name comes from early aviators who first spotted them from aircraft in the 1920s and thought they resembled the shape of a box kite from above. Long stone walls, sometimes stretching for several kilometers, converging into an enclosure with small circular pits at the ends. From the ground, they're almost invisible, just low stone lines scattered across a rocky landscape. From the air, the shape becomes unmistakable. There are thousands of them, across the Negev, across the Sinai, stretching into Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and beyond. Some researchers estimate the total number across the region at over 6,000 individual structures. They vary in size from a few hundred meters to structures whose walls run for more than 5 kilometers in a single continuous line. The leading explanation is that they were animal traps. Hunters would drive herds of gazelle or other animals along the converging walls, funneling them toward the enclosed pits where they'd be killed. This explanation is logical. It accounts for the shape, but it raises more questions than it answers. Who built them? The construction required organized labor on a scale that implies large, coordinated communities, not the small, nomadic bands we typically associate with early desert peoples. Some of the structures have been dated to over 5,000 years ago. Others appear to be much more recent, possibly still in use as late as the early medieval period. They were built, abandoned, and in some cases appear to have been deliberately modified by people working thousands of years after the original construction. The sheer scale of effort is what defies easy categorization. Hundreds of thousands of individual stones placed in precise alignments across landscapes so harsh that survival itself was a daily struggle. Some of the walls run perfectly straight for kilometers across terrain that has no obvious reason for that straightness. No ridgeline, no water feature, nothing. They simply go straight, as though the builders were following something we cannot see. And no written record anywhere, not in Egyptian, Babylonian, or any other ancient source, mentions them. They were built in secret, used and forgotten, while every other major civilization in the region was busy writing things down. There is one more detail that researchers have struggled to categorize. When aerial surveys catalog the desert kites across the broader region, they notice that certain clusters of structures appear to be connected. Walls from separate kites align so precisely that they form a single extended system when viewed from altitude. This would mean different communities, separated by dozens of kilometers of trackless desert, were coordinating their construction efforts over generations. The logistics of this, without written language or surveying instruments as we know them, are staggering. Some researchers have proposed that the straight lines were guided by smoke signals visible from high ground. Others have suggested the alignments are coincidental. Neither explanation fully satisfies, and the surveys have quietly continued without producing a consensus. The Negev keeps its geometry. The desert floor bakes in silence, covered in lines that somebody drew very deliberately for reasons we still cannot agree on. 8th place belongs to Rujum El Hiri, known in English as the Wheel of Giants. Drive northeast from the Sea of Galilee, up into the basalt plateau of the Golan Heights, and you'll eventually reach a structure that has no business existing where it does. 4 concentric stone circles, connected by dozens of radial walls, surrounding a central burial mound. The outer ring alone measures nearly 160 meters in diameter. The entire structure contains an estimated 40,000 tons of basalt stone, stacked without mortar, with some individual walls reaching a height of over 2 meters. It is one of the largest megalithic structures in the Middle East, older than Stonehenge, constructed with a comparable investment of labor in one of the most remote, inhospitable environments in the region. And almost nobody outside of archaeology circles has ever heard of it. The name Wheel of Giants was given by local Druze and Bedouin communities, who long believed the structure was too large to have been built by ordinary humans. When aerial surveys first mapped it properly in the 1960s, researchers were struck by how clearly the wheel shape emerged from above, a shape completely invisible from the ground. This raises an immediate problem. If the builders couldn't see the full design from any point within it, why build it that way? Who was the intended audience for the pattern? Astronomical alignment has been the most persistent theory. In midsummer, the sun rises through a specific gap in the northeastern section of the walls in a way that appears deliberate. At winter solstice, a similar alignment appears in a different gate. Whether this is intentional design or coincidence has been debated for decades without resolution. The central mound contains a burial chamber, but when excavated, it held almost nothing. A few bones, a few pottery fragments. Either the tomb was robbed in antiquity, or it was never meant to hold anything significant. Both possibilities are troubling for different reasons. Why build 40,000 tons of stone around an empty room? The local plateau is scattered with dolmens, simple stone burial structures from roughly the same period. Rujum el-Hiri stands alone among them, dramatically larger, dramatically more complex, and dramatically more deliberate in its design. Whatever the wheel was for, whoever directed its construction, they had something specific in mind. That intention has not survived. Only the stones remain, sitting under the Golan sun, patient as they have always been. What makes the silence around Rujum el-Hiri particularly strange is how little attention it receives compared to sites of equivalent scale in other parts of the world. Stonehenge, which is younger and arguably less complex in terms of total material moved, has generated centuries of scholarship, popular fascination, and scientific investigation. Rujum el-Hiri has generated a handful of academic papers and a UNESCO inscription. Tours visit, researchers measure, and then they go home with the same questions they arrived with. There is no artifact inside the structure that carries an inscription. No tool, no pottery, no organic material in sufficient quantity to tell a clean story. The people who built it left nothing behind except the shape itself. 40,000 tons of basalt arranged in a pattern that only makes sense when you leave the ground. Whether that was intentional, whether the pattern was always meant to be seen from above, is a question that sits at the center of everything we don't know about the oldest inhabitants of this plateau. And no one, so far, has been able to answer it. In seventh place, Jerusalem, sitting directly on a seismic fault. When most people think about Jerusalem, they think about history, religion, pilgrimage. They don't think about tectonic plates. But beneath the ancient city, directly underneath the foundations of some of the most important religious structures on Earth, the ground is cracked. And it has been cracking, slowly and violently, for as long as the city has stood. The Dead Sea Transform Fault runs almost the full length of Israel from north to south, and it passes directly beneath Jerusalem. This is not a minor geographical footnote. This is one of the most seismically active fault systems in the Middle East, and it has already destroyed Jerusalem once in recorded history, and almost certainly more than once before written records began. In 749 CE, a massive earthquake struck the region. Contemporary accounts describe widespread destruction across dozens of cities. Jericho was devastated. Tiberias was largely destroyed. In Jerusalem, entire sections of the city collapsed. The death toll across the region has been estimated in the tens of thousands. The earthquake left its mark in the archaeological layers beneath modern Jerusalem, a clear stratum of collapsed buildings, buried artifacts, and disrupted foundations that geologists can identify with precision. This was not the first. Research into the seismic history of the fault has identified at least a dozen major earthquakes over the past 4,000 years that would have been felt severely in Jerusalem. Some researchers have proposed that specific biblical accounts, the walls of Jericho, the darkness at the crucifixion, various descriptions of the ground shaking, may preserve folk memories of actual seismic events. This is a legitimate area of academic inquiry, not fringe speculation. What makes this genuinely unsettling is the present situation. The old city of Jerusalem is built on top of thousands of years of prior construction. Its foundations rest on foundations, which rest on older foundations, which rest on structures that have already survived and been broken by multiple earthquakes. The bedrock beneath the city is heavily fractured. Modern seismic surveys have found that the soil liquefaction risk in certain areas of the city is significant, meaning that in a major earthquake, ground that appears solid would behave like liquid. Geologists are not subtle about this. They describe Jerusalem as overdue for a major seismic event. The fault has been relatively quiet for several hundred years by historical standards. The energy is accumulating. When it releases, not if, but when, the impact on a city of nearly 1 million people, built on centuries of archaeological layers with limited modern reinforcement in its oldest sections, will be unlike anything that has happened here in the modern era. The city has been destroyed and rebuilt more times than any other major urban center in the world. The question is not whether it will happen again. The question is what will be lost when it does. Because what sits above the fault is not just any city. Beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre lie foundations dating to the 1st century. The foundations of the Jewish quarter rest on layers that descend through the Second Temple period, the First Temple period, and beyond. The Al-Aqsa Mosque sits on a platform engineered 2,000 years ago with a structural logic that has kept it standing through multiple earthquakes, but which was never designed for the magnitude that seismologists now consider possible. Modern engineers have quietly studied the old city's vulnerability. Their assessments are not publicly available in full, but what has been published is sobering. Unreinforced stone masonry, the dominant construction material across centuries of building here, performs poorly in seismic events. The narrow, winding streets of the old city would trap rubble and block emergency access. The underground tunnel networks, cisterns, and vaulted spaces create a complex of subsurface voids that can amplify or redirect seismic waves in unpredictable ways. The fault line does not care about the age of what sits above it. It does not distinguish between a Byzantine church and a Roman cistern and a 21st century apartment building. When it moves, everything on the surface moves with it. Jerusalem has rebuilt before. It will rebuild again. But the layers of what cannot be reconstructed, the original stones, the buried chambers, the things that have survived every previous catastrophe precisely because they were underground, those sit closest to what is coming. 6th place goes to the Cave of Machpelah. In the city of Hebron, there is a building that has been continuously in use as a place of worship for longer than almost any other structure on earth. It sits over a cave. Inside that cave, according to Jewish, Christian, and Islamic tradition alike, are the tombs of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and their wives, the patriarchs and matriarchs of 3 of the world's major religions. The cave is called Machpelah, and almost no one alive has ever entered it. The above-ground structure, a massive rectangular enclosure of enormous stone blocks, was built by Herod the Great roughly 2,000 years ago. The walls are extraordinary in themselves. Courses of stone measuring up to 7 meters in length, fitted together with a precision that still baffles engineers who study them. But the structure itself is almost incidental. What matters is what it sits on top of. Access to the cave below has been essentially prohibited for centuries. During the Byzantine period, Christian authorities sealed the entrance. During the Crusader period, a brief exploration reportedly took place. Accounts from the period, though unreliable in specifics, describe chambers extending far below the surface, with several antechambers before reaching the actual burial space. In the Mamluk period, Jewish and Christian visitors were banned from entering at all, restricted to the seventh step of an external staircase. The rule lasted for roughly 700 years. In 1981, a small group of Israeli scholars and military personnel allegedly entered the cave through a narrow shaft that had been discovered beneath the floor of the building. What they found, or what they claim to have found, has become one of the most disputed archaeological episodes in Israeli history. Participants have given conflicting accounts. Some describe a series of chambers, pottery, and human remains. Others deny the extent of what was described. The Israeli government has not released a formal account of what was documented. Photographs reportedly taken during the visit have never been made public. The cave today remains sealed. Officially, this is presented as a matter of religious sensitivity. The site is sacred to both Muslims and Jews, and excavation would trigger catastrophic political conflict. That is almost certainly true. But it also means that what may be the oldest continuously venerated burial site on Earth, a site central to the origin stories of billions of people, has never been properly investigated. Whether the remains inside are what tradition claims, whether the cave extends further than known, whether there are additional chambers that have never been explored, all of this remains officially unknown. Do you think the Israeli government is deliberately keeping what's down there a secret? Leave your answer in the comments, because the official silence around this site is harder and harder to explain as simply respect for religious sensitivities. The people said to be buried in that cave, if they existed, if they are who tradition says they are, were alive before the alphabet was fully developed, before iron smelting, before almost everything we associate with civilized history. And yet 3 of the world's most powerful religions point to that sealed darkness as the starting point of their entire spiritual lineage. Billions of people orient themselves in some meaningful sense around what may or may not be in a cave they will never be permitted to enter. The last person to fully document what they saw down there, whoever that was, in whatever century, has been dead for generations. Their account, if it was ever written down, has not surfaced. The stones above are enormous and perfect and have not shifted. The entrance remains sealed. The cave waits, in the way that caves do, with no awareness of how much is riding on what it contains. Fifth on this list, the Temple Mount excavation ban. In the center of Jerusalem, there is a platform roughly the size of 30 football fields. It has been called the most contested piece of real estate on Earth. On top of it sit 2 of the most important Islamic structures in the world, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Beneath it, according to archaeological inference, historical sources, and the traditions of billions of people worldwide, may lie the most significant archaeological site in human history. And no one is allowed to dig there. The Temple Mount, known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary, sits directly above the site of the first and second Jewish temples. The first temple, attributed to Solomon, was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. The second temple, rebuilt and massively expanded by Herod the Great, was destroyed by Rome in 70 CE. Both destructions were thorough. Both destroyers were intent on erasure. But destruction of buildings does not destroy what's beneath them. It buries it. What Israeli archaeologists believe may be under the Temple Mount includes the original foundation stones of Solomon's temple, sealed chambers from the Second Temple period, and potentially the contents of the temple treasury, gold, ritual vessels, and documents that would have been hidden as the Roman siege closed in. Some researchers have proposed that the Ark of the Covenant, if it existed, would have been stored in a subterranean chamber directly beneath the platform's center. This is speculation, but it is informed speculation based on historical accounts of the temple's inner chambers that describe exactly such a storage space. Access to the mount is administered by the Waqf, the Islamic trust that has controlled the site since the Arab conquest of Jerusalem in the 7th century. Israeli authority over the site after 1967 did not extend to excavation rights. The arrangement has been described as the strangest jurisdictional compromise in the world. Israel controls the land around the mount, the Waqf controls what happens on top of it, and nobody controls what happens underneath, because what happens underneath is nothing. Excavation is politically impossible. Both sides understand this. Neither side will say it out loud. What makes this combustible rather than merely frustrating is what happened in 1999. The Waqf undertook construction work to create a new underground mosque in a space beneath the southeastern corner of the platform, an area known as Solomon's Stables, a massive, vaulted space originally built by Herod. The construction involved the removal of thousands of tons of soil and rubble. Israeli archaeologists were not permitted to conduct any systematic survey of the material before it was removed. The soil was dumped at a site outside the city. Volunteers began sifting through the dumped material with screens. What they found was extraordinary. Artifacts spanning every major period of occupation on the mount. Bronze Age pottery, Iron Age seal impressions, fragments of Hasmonean stonework, Roman coins, Byzantine objects. All of it had been removed from context, making its archaeological significance permanently diminished. The finds confirm that the soil being discarded was archaeologically dense across thousands of years. They also confirm that more, still in context, remained underground. The Israeli Antiquities Authority formally protested. Academic institutions issued statements. Nothing changed. The mosque was completed. The dumped soil was eventually moved to a municipal landfill. What remains under the platform is now a question that cannot be answered in the near term. The political situation is not improving. The religious significance of the site to over 2 billion people worldwide ensures that any attempt to excavate, however carefully framed, however professionally conducted, would be received as an existential provocation. The only scenario in which excavation becomes possible is one that no reasonable person can currently imagine. And so the ground beneath the most contested platform on Earth keeps its contents. The absence of investigation is itself a kind of answer. If archaeologists were permitted to dig beneath the Temple Mount and found nothing of significance, the question would be settled. The fact that no one will allow the question to be asked suggests that the people in a position to permit it are not entirely comfortable with what the answer might be. Fourth place belongs to the Western Wall, and a mystery that sits in plain sight. Millions of people visit the Western Wall every year. They press their foreheads against the ancient stone. They push folded prayers into the cracks between the blocks. They photograph it. They weep in front of it. But almost none of them look at what's actually beneath their feet or understand what the wall actually is, because the popular image of it hides a secret that changes everything about what you're seeing. The Western Wall, as it appears to visitors, is a section of retaining wall built by Herod the Great around 2,000 years ago to support the expanded Temple Mount platform. It is not the wall of the temple itself. The temple is gone, destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, its stones dismantled and scattered. What remains is the outer edge of the platform that supported it. But here is the detail that most visitors never learn. The 11 visible rows of massive Herodian stone blocks that form the iconic prayer section account for only a fraction of the wall's total height. Below the current ground level, the wall continues downward for another 19 courses of stone. The ground has risen by roughly 17 meters over 2,000 years. Accumulated debris, deliberate fill, the weight of centuries of construction above. What visitors touch is the top of a structure far more massive than it appears. The real base of the Herodian wall lies far below where anyone stands. And at the very bottom, the lowest courses of stone, now buried and inaccessible. Something unusual was found during excavations in the 20th century. A single stone block. One stone in the foundation course, measuring approximately 13 meters in length and weighing an estimated 570 tons. It is one of the heaviest building blocks used by any ancient civilization anywhere on Earth. Moving it with modern equipment would require specialized heavy lift machinery. Moving it with the technology available 2,000 years ago, when it was placed with millimeter precision into a foundation that has not shifted in 20 centuries, remains an engineering puzzle that has not been satisfactorily solved. The Romans who destroyed the temple dismantled everything above ground. They went to extraordinary lengths to erase what Herod had built. But they left the foundation. They either couldn't move it or decided not to. The result is that buried beneath one of the most visited prayer sites on Earth is a block of stone that should not exist. A piece of engineering from an era we still don't fully understand, sitting in the dark below the prayers, below the tourists, below the noise. Official science has documented it, measured it, and filed the report. The question of how it got there has been set aside. Some problems apparently are easier to record than to answer. For context on that weight, the ancient Egyptians moved stones weighing around 400 to 500 tons for the construction of the great obelisks. But those were dragged on sleds across flat desert, down the Nile by boat, over routes that engineers can reconstruct in detail. The Herodian block at the base of the Western Wall was moved through a city, through streets, and placed into a foundation with a precision that left no room for adjustment. The blocks around it are fitted so tightly that a piece of paper cannot be slid between them without resistance. Herod the Great is historically documented as an extraordinary builder. His projects at Caesarea, Masada, and Herodion all display engineering capability that was ahead of his time. But the foundation stones of the Western Wall sit outside the range of what can be explained by known Roman-era engineering, even generously applied. The Romans themselves, who inherited the full technological tradition of the ancient world, never moved anything this heavy with this kind of precision. What the wall presents to visitors today, a surface for prayer, a surface for folded notes, a surface for photographs, is the top of something that goes much deeper than the eye can reach. People press their hands against it and feel something they describe as presence, as weight, as history. They may be more accurate than they know. The stone beneath their palms is the visible edge of a structure that, fully understood, remains beyond our capacity to fully explain. Third on the list, the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd threw a rock into a cave near the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea and heard pottery shatter. What he had found would become one of the most important archaeological discoveries in human history. A collection of ancient manuscripts so significant that they have genuinely altered our understanding of the Bible, early Judaism, and the origins of Christianity. The scrolls are old. The oldest fragments date to roughly the 3rd century BCE. That's more than 2,200 years ago. The collection includes the oldest known surviving copies of virtually every book of the Hebrew Bible, as well as texts that had been entirely unknown. Descriptions of an apocalyptic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Detailed rules for a messianic community, hymns, prophecies, and a document known as the Copper Scroll, which appears to describe the locations of a vast hidden treasure. The caves near Qumran contain material that had been preserved by accident and by design. The desert climate, bone-dry, hot, almost sterile, had protected organic material that would have rotted within years anywhere else. The people who hid the scrolls, whoever they were, had sealed them in ceramic jars and placed them in locations where human access was minimal and the air almost never moved. They survived because someone, 2,000 years ago, wanted them to survive. What the scrolls revealed shocked the academic world. Passages in the Dead Sea Scrolls predate the oldest previously known biblical manuscripts by roughly 1,000 years, and in many cases they show that the text of the Bible as we know it today is not identical to the text that existed 2 millennia ago. Words are different. Entire passages appear in different forms. Some sections of what later became canonical scripture appear here as one version among several equally authoritative alternatives. The implications of this are still being processed. Not all the scrolls have been fully published. For decades after their discovery, access to the original materials was restricted to a small group of scholars, a monopoly so tight that other researchers called it scandalous. Photographs taken in the 50s and 60s sat in archives without being made available to the wider academic community for 30 years. When access was finally opened in the 90s, it came only after sustained public and academic pressure. What was in those decades of restricted access? The official answer is that the delay was logistical. Too many fragments, too few resources, complex scholarly work. That may be entirely true, but the scrolls describe a version of religious history that is more complicated, more contested, and more uncertain than the versions taught by any of the three faiths that claim Abraham as their father. The timing of the restricted access and who was doing the restricting is something researchers still prefer not to dwell on. The Copper Scroll deserves a moment of its own. Unlike every other scroll found at Qumran, which are written on leather or papyrus in a literary style, the Copper Scroll is exactly what its name implies: text engraved on thin sheets of copper, riveted together. Its content is purely practical, a list of 64 locations described in specific geographical terms, each containing buried treasure: gold, silver, ritual vessels, scrolls. The quantities described are enormous. Estimates based on the text suggest a total weight of precious metal in the tens of tons. Researchers are divided on whether the Copper Scroll is a genuine inventory or an elaborate fiction, perhaps a religious text encoding symbolic locations rather than real ones. The geographical descriptions use place names that don't all correspond to known locations. Expeditions have searched for some of the sites and found nothing. Others have not been searched because the locations, if the text is taken literally, would place them beneath areas of Jerusalem that cannot currently be excavated. If the treasure is real, some of it may still be there. If it's not real, it was someone's idea of a very strange joke to engrave on copper and hide in a desert cave. Either way, it has been sitting in a display case in a Jordanian museum since the 1960s, and the question of what it actually means remains unanswered. Runner-up on this list, and one of the most consequential open secrets of the modern era, is Dimona. In the 1950s, a dome appeared in the Negev desert, roughly 13 kilometers southeast of the town of Dimona. Israeli officials told the outside world it was a textile factory. American U-2 spy planes flying over the site in 1958 sent back photographs that showed something quite different. What they had found was a nuclear reactor, and the beginning of one of the most successful secret weapons programs in modern history. Israel has never officially confirmed that it possesses nuclear weapons. This policy, known as nuclear ambiguity, or in Hebrew, amimut, has been maintained without exception for over 60 years. No Israeli government official has confirmed the weapons exist. No official inspection of the Dimona facility has ever been permitted by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Israel is not a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The facility at Dimona exists in a kind of official reality where it cannot be discussed. In 1986, a man named Mordecai Vanunu walked into the Sunday Times office in London and handed over photographs he had taken secretly inside the Dimona facility. The images showed what appeared to be a sophisticated nuclear weapons production operation. Control panels, metallic components of weapons cores, an underground structure far more extensive than anything publicly acknowledged. Vanunu had worked as a technician at the facility for nearly a decade. The photographs were analyzed by nuclear weapons experts who concluded they were consistent with a serious weapons program producing dozens of warheads. The Sunday Times published the story. The response from Israel was immediate and extraordinary. Mossad agents ran an operation to lure Vanunu from London to Rome using a female intelligence officer. He was drugged, kidnapped, smuggled back to Israel on a cargo ship, tried in secret, and sentenced to 18 years in prison, 11 of which he served in solitary confinement. He was not charged with lying. He was charged with revealing state secrets, which means that what he revealed was true. How many warheads exist? What delivery systems are in place? What the underground facility at Dimona actually contains at its deepest levels? None of this is publicly confirmed. Estimates from Western intelligence agencies have ranged from 80 to 400 warheads, depending on the decade and the source. The facility has been operational for over 60 years. It continues to operate today. Satellite images show ongoing construction and expansion. What is being built in the desert, in a facility that no outside inspector has ever entered, remains one of the most consequential open secrets in the world. Open because everyone knows it exists. Secret because no one in authority will say so out loud. The implications of this are not abstract. Israel sits in a region where multiple neighboring states have at various points pursued their own nuclear programs. The policy of ambiguity was calculated to deter without provoking, to send a message that everyone would understand without any official confirmation that would require a formal international response. For decades, that calculation held. It still holds today, technically. But the regional security environment has shifted in ways that were not anticipated when the policy was first adopted. And the question of what ambiguity is still actually managing, and for how long, is one that defense analysts discuss with increasing urgency. Vanunu, after his release, was prohibited from leaving Israel and from speaking to foreign nationals without permission. He was arrested multiple times for giving interviews to foreign journalists, each arrest generating another small burst of international coverage and another round of official non-response from Jerusalem. He described the interior of the Dimona facility in consistent detail across dozens of interviews over many years. The underground levels, the specific equipment he photographed, the scale of production he witnessed. None of it was ever officially addressed. The dome in the Negev still stands. Satellite images show it clearly. The facility around it has expanded substantially over the decades, with new structures appearing in images taken over recent years. Whatever is being done there, it is still being done. The textile factory that never was continues to operate in the desert, producing something that everyone knows about and no one is allowed to confirm. That may be the strangest thing about Dimona, not the weapons themselves, but the collective agreement by governments, international bodies, and media institutions to maintain a fiction that has been transparently false for 60 years. The silence is not the product of successful secrecy. It is a choice. And choices like that are always made for reasons. And at number 1, the most unsettling of all, Megiddo. There is a hill in northern Israel, in the fertile Jezreel Valley, between the Galilee and the coast. It is called Tel Megiddo, Tel being the Hebrew word for a mound formed by the accumulated ruins of successive civilizations, built on top of one another across thousands of years. And this particular hill has been continuously occupied, fought over, and destroyed more times than almost any other site on Earth. Megiddo is where Armageddon comes from, not metaphorically, etymologically. The Greek word Armageddon, used in the book of Revelation to describe the site of the final battle between good and evil, is derived directly from Har Megiddo, the Hebrew for Mount Megiddo. This hill specifically, this location on this stretch of valley in northern Israel, is where the biblical text says the world will end. What makes Megiddo extraordinary is not the prophecy. It is the fact that the prophecy is attached to a place that genuinely appears, by archaeological record, to function as the world's most efficient killing ground. At least 26 distinct civilizations have built cities on this hill, one on top of the other, over a span of 7,000 years. Almost all of them were destroyed violently. Egyptian armies fought here. Canaanite kings held it. Solomon built a city here, with stables for thousands of horses. Assyrian forces took it in 732 BCE, dismantling everything. The pharaoh Necho II fought here. Alexander the Great's armies passed through. Napoleon fought the Battle of Mount Tabor, nearby in 1799, and later called the Jezreel Valley the most natural battlefield on Earth. British forces under General Allenby fought a decisive engagement at Megiddo in 1918. Excavations at the site have revealed 26 layers of habitation and destruction, one on top of the other, like a geological record of violence. Each layer represents a city that was built, flourished, and burned. In some layers, the destruction is so thorough that the fire that ended it is still visible. Ash, charred timber, collapsed walls, sealed under the foundations of whatever came next. The geography explains some of it. Megiddo sits at the junction of the most important trade and military route connecting Egypt to Mesopotamia, the pass through the Carmel mountain range into the Jezreel Valley. Whoever controlled Megiddo controlled the movement of armies and goods between two entire continents. This made it worth fighting for, over and over, across every era of human history. But there is something else at work here that geography alone cannot explain. A quality to this particular hill that archaeologists notice but rarely write about in academic journals. The destruction layers are too consistent, too thorough, too evenly distributed across time periods that have nothing to do with one another. Civilizations that never knew each other, using weapons centuries apart, all managed to reduce this same hill to ash in roughly the same catastrophic way. The site is a UNESCO World Heritage Site now. Tourist buses arrive in the mornings. People walk across the excavated surface and look down into the trenches where layer after layer of burned city is visible, stacked like pages in a book. The valley below is green and wide and peaceful in the afternoon light. Farmers work fields that have been worked since before writing existed, and somewhere below the current excavation level, deeper than any team has yet reached, the layers continue. More cities, more destruction, more ash. Each one convinced, presumably, that what was being built this time would last. It never did. And if the text that gave this place its name in every language on Earth turns out to be more than poetry, if Megiddo has one more layer left to add to its record, then the valley below will look exactly as it looks today, right up until it doesn't.